Today's panel is titled, Hey Brother. So I will start with Ambassador Clark. Ambassador Clark, are we brothers? Are the three countries family?
I think we're sisters. I don't think we're brothers, right? I mean, right? I mean, you know, I think North America is a work in progress. I think we need to deepen. I think we need to find ways of building that relationship, not just governments, of course, but the private sector and universities. You know, that's what it's all about. It's about ensuring that we live as a region and think as a region, right? And that we recommit to the idea of North America, which, you know, perhaps has been lost a little bit in the wash. We're focused on certain elements of the relationship, whether it's trade or investment or the political relationship. But I think we really need to do the hard work of thinking through what it means to be a region and brothers or sisters. And I think it goes to values, actually, that we share, the three countries. You know, democracy, respect for human rights, and there are imperfections in all three countries on that front, right? None of us is perfect, but a sense of those shared values, you know, whether it's on the place of women in society, whether it's on diversity and inclusion, whether it's on Indigenous people, which is a subject of particular interest to my government. It strikes me that community of values that we have is something that we have to foster and sustain.
Yeah, thank you. Ambassador Moctezuma, you joined as the representative of our country in Washington, and you arrived to Washington in February of 2021. Share with us what were your expectations of the post and what has been the reality looking back at your tenure as Mexico's ambassador to Washington.
Thank you very much, and thank everybody for coming. I think that when you get to Washington, your expectations are very high. It was still COVID when I arrived, so it was quite difficult to have a lot of relationships, not only with the American government, but also with the diplomatic corps and society. But what I discovered in Washington was, first of all, that President Biden was absolutely for a very close relationship with Mexico. And I had an expectation of having of building a great relationship between Mexico and the U.S., and I believe that it was fully fulfilled by not only the president, but also all the cabinet. And very important part of that relationship to build the integration we built was the Ambassador Ken Salazar. He was here in Mexico doing a great job, and we developed a working relationship that, of course, translated later into friendship. And I think that that's one very, very important part of the experience.
Yeah.
Having said that, when you get to the office of the ambassador in Washington, you realize how deep and how broad is the relationship between Mexico and the U.S. Nobody really does until you are in that desk, because every day you have any kind of issues related not just with trade, migration, security, what appears on the media, but with many, many issues regarding fish and strawberries and people at the sea sailing to the territorial waters, and so many things. And now you can add football, that it's something that Mexicans and Americans should know better. So I think that the narrative between our relationship is something that we have to constantly construct and share, and we need to let everybody understand how this relationship affects their everyday life. And I think that after these years, traveling all around the US, because we have 53 consulates, there are a lot of consuls here. Let me say hi to all of them. And the number of Mexicans in the US, which is 38 million, and the relationship that you can find in the US between Mexicans and Americans, I wouldn't say just friends, we're family, to say it in one word. And sometimes, as we do everyone its own policies, I say that we are roommates. And a roommate really can affect your life, so it's better to have a very good relationship. And I think that we're achieving that, and that North America, as it was said, it's a work in progress, but it's progressing with very strong steps.
Thank you. Ambassador Salazar, similarly, you arrived in September of 2021 to Mexico. And during that time frame, there's been a lot of hiccups, but a lot of great opportunities and achievements that have been realized during your tenure as a U.S. ambassador to Mexico. How do you convey the deep integration and dependence also that the U.S. has, particularly on Mexico, back to Washington? And doubling down what Ambassador Moctezuma said right now, it is an interdependent relationship, it is a family relationship. So how do you make sure that that brotherhood is not only seen through the eyes of brothers that meet over Thanksgiving dinner, but that brothers that speak on a daily basis?
Thank you very much, Alma. Let me just first of all say we are living at this very moment, I think, the North American moment. And I think we are all very proud across the world that you have the first woman president in North America elected in office and sworn in today. And I, just for that fact alone, that we have seen the progress of women across the world, but shown here in Mexico with this last election, I think we need to applaud what Mexico has done as a society. You know, Alma, you ask about the relationship and where we are. And I say we are at this American moment of time for North America to become, and it is, the leading power in the world in democracy and economics and addressing tough issues like climate and migration. But I will say we've arrived at this moment through a lot of hard work by the people who are in this room. But I want to particularly point out Esteban Moctezuma and Graeme Clark as two great ambassadors. You know, I never imagined when I walked into Esteban's office in August, now more than 3 years ago, and he was telling me about the relationship and how he saw it. And frankly, at that point in time, with the former president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, there had been very little dialogue. No high-level economic dialogues, no high-level security dialogues. It had been a relationship of, I think, a lot of friction. And what Esteban told me is, he said, I can be the bridge. And I got to say, when you think of somebody who has served with high distinction as a member of the cabinet, as a leading voice in Mexico and the United States, one thing that I am absolutely 100% convinced of is that he's been the greatest ambassador to the United States we've ever had. So I want to have you join with me in giving him a round of applause. Es el mejor de los mejores, el embajador Moctezuma. And then, very interesting, right? Because Mexico looks to the north, and there you see Canada. And as Graeme and I often talk about, Canada is big, 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 small in population in comparison to Mexico or the United States. But yet, what we've been able to do is to really create this vision and then this reality of the North American integration. I see that every day. And Graeme, who was here long before I got here, has been a leading voice in making sure that we're moving towards that agenda. He says he only has 2 more months here, but I already talked to Ottawa, and they're going to extend him for another year. But let's give him a round of applause because he's so awesome.
Do you want to? Do you want to?
And then
I'd love to stay.
Okay.
we love to stay, so maybe if this room comes up with a good petition, we can get the Canadians.
You would like to stay as well, Ambassador Salazar?
We'd like Esteban to stay too.
So the three of them, yes.
Because it's been a great relationship. But if I may just,
Sure.
It's about this American moment that we're living in, which is really the hard work and result of the last 3 years. I would like everybody who works at Mission Mexico, the consulates led by Mark Johnson, Deputy Chief of Mission, stand up just a minute so people can see who's in the room. Jackie Ward, Economic Minister, stand up. Our consulate, Rafael Foley, Silvia Gonzalez, Zeppa Krieger, Carlos, John, all of you. They are your ambassadors. Thank you so much for being here. So that's what I got to say.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador Salazar. Ambassador Clark, I'd like to now enter into a phase in our conversation that is, rather than looking at the tenure that the three of you have had in your current posts, is looking at the present dynamic of the North America relationship. And you have highlighted the importance of human capital movement between Canada and Mexico, mainly through circular migration programs. How can temporary work programs improve to benefit both countries? And what can the US and Mexico also learn from the experience that the Canadian and Mexico program have resulted in?
So for those of you who don't know, we have a number of circular migration programs between Canada and Mexico. The best known is the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program that enables some 50,000 Mexicans to come every year to Canada and to work in our farms and help us with our crops, but in other sectors as well. And our agricultural economy is very much dependent on those workers. And we sensed that particularly during the pandemic when we had difficulty recruiting people or getting them into Canada. Anyway, these programs of circular migration, I think that's one approach that we can take, because surely we need in the North American space a discussion about migration and about labor mobility. I think that's absolutely essential. I find it fascinating traveling in Mexico that there are areas of the country where there are labor shortages and where companies are desperately trying to leverage the communities of migrants to Mexico, migrants who aren't going north but who want to stay in Mexico and work and build their families and their communities there. These are things that we need as all three nations to address. The migratory bilateral issue, which is of course not my issue, but it strikes me that it cannot simply be a bilateral discussion. It needs to be a trilateral discussion or America's wide discussion.
Thank you. I'll continue on the migration topic. And Ambassador Moctezuma, I'd like to seek your thoughts on the joint responsibility to address the migration challenge. You have mentioned on different occasions the importance of joint responsibility to addressing regional migration. As we've seen the flows of migrants crossing through Mexico and reaching the US-Mexico border are in decline from last year to now. But how can Mexico work with the US authorities to strengthen cooperation and ensure safe and orderly pathways to migration? And what have been the lessons learned from the drastic numbers that we saw, particularly in 2021 and 2022, and even on the record high of 3.2 million migrants reaching the US-Mexico border last year?
Well, I think that the only way you can really tackle the migratory flow is through regional commitment. Because a lot of people think that the problem of migration for the US starts in the northern Mexican border. And that's not accurate, because the migration issue starts in all the continent, including the US, because there are pull factors. And so when you have so many countries that are crossed by different nationalities in order to get to the US, you have to ask those countries to adopt the responsibility that they share in this flow, because together with migration, there are another phenomena like smugglers and human rights and safety that has to be guaranteed. I remember one of our first meetings in Washington was a dinner in the Mexican residence that Ken and I organized with all the ambassadors of Central America and South America in order to speak about this issue. And that was, I believe, the first time that it was properly raised, the issue of the regional participation in this phenomena. The response has been very important. I think that all the countries have really responded to these efforts. And we're not just working in the flow of migrants, but also in the root causes. So Mexico started investing in 6 different countries, but in a very specific way, which is to first get to know which towns, which localities expelled people and gave them the incentives to become migrants. And going into those localities and having offering to many people the chance to have direct transfers and to have a job and to have an income is something that it showed that it really worked, because about 48% of the people that said that they were willing to leave after these programs, they said that with the new income they had, they were reluctant to leave. So root causes is something very important. Then also with US aid, this program was expanded and created in order to follow the same methodology. The other issue is the legal pathways. Both Mexico and the US started to open up legal pathways. We became an asylum country. Last year we gave about 130,000 permits for all these people to stay in Mexico. We also gave a lot of job permits. And you can say very broadly that a lot of the flow that comes into Mexico from the southern border doesn't get to the northern border because of all these programs. And also, we started asking for more temporary visas. Temporary visas are very, very important. Canada knows very well about this, and Graeme McLarty is an advocate of these visas. When there are temporary visas, people go to work and they stay for a period of 6 to 8 months working in the US and come back to Mexico. The difference between that and the undocumented crossings is that people with temporary visas go to the US alone, not with the whole family. And they come back to Mexico, they don't stay. And the income they receive in the US is invested in building up their homes. About 93, 94% do that. So they are rooting in Mexico. And we could manage to expand these visas from about 180,000 when I arrived to almost 400,000 now. So that's a very important part of this strategy. And also, we are pushing for a comprehensive migratory reform that includes DACA. DACA is very important for Mexico. These people need to have a chance and to have a legal staying in the US. And that is part of our policy permanently. And what I can summarize is that regarding migration, Mexico is not the problem. Mexico is part of the solution. And that has to be understood in both sides of the border, because finger pointing is not the best way to advance. And I believe that up to now, we have advanced a lot with the US government in order to have an orderly, secure, and regular migration.
Thank you. Ambassador Salazar, sticking to the topic of migration, how can we continue to build upon the mechanisms to address the migration flow, particularly at this time where migration has become such an important issue in the United States and within the upcoming elections in the US as well?
So let me first echo complete agreement with what both Graeme and Esteban just said here. I also very strongly believe that when history looks back at the Western Hemisphere, what they will come to judge is that the last 3 years have brought in a new paradigm for us to deal with the migration realities of the Western Hemisphere, founded on the principles that President Biden and Mexico and other countries announced in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles Declaration. Mm-hmm. It is not all that complicated. I've heard President López Obrador and President Biden talk about this many times in meetings with Esteban and with me and others. It's a pretty simple formula. It's first, you have to attend to the root causes. You got to create development opportunities in Guatemala and in other places where you have countries where migrants are having to leave because of the poverty in some of those countries. So root causes, let's attend those root causes. Number two, lawful pathways, as Esteban and Graeme were talking about. We in the United States, H-2As, we issued over 360,000 H-2As just out of Mission, Mexico last year. We're expanding that into Guatemala and Honduras and other places. So lawful pathways. And then third, enforcement. And that's going after human traffickers with everything that we have, human smugglers with everything that we have, but doing it jointly, doing it as partners with total respect to the sovereignty of countries involved. So if you think about it, it's a simple three-legged stool. It's attending the root causes, mm-hmm. It's expanding lawful pathways, and it's compliance with the law. Mm-hmm. And we have been doing that, and my hope is that very much is a paradigm of the future. And one just needs to pause for 1 minute. You know, I see my good friend Giovanni and all the great work that UNHCR does. I see my wonderful former colleague, Carlos Gutierrez, Secretary of Commerce under President Bush. I remember being in those meetings in the White House at the time with Senator Kennedy and John McCain and a host of others who were trying to work on this puzzle of immigration reform. Didn't happen. Didn't happen in the 90s, didn't happen 2000s, you know, some now 30, 40 years later, we have the formula in hand. Mm-hmm. And what we need to commit ourselves to doing is no matter what happens in the election in the United States, is making sure that this paradigm of Western Hemisphere cooperation built around these three pillars of the human mobility is something that we continue to push for. I remember, I don't know if the U.S., there's the AmCham is here, it's the U.S. Chamber as well. And I remember in those days talking to Mr. Donahue, the head of the chamber at the time, about how the business community had to be involved in finding solutions. We tried hard to get immigration reform passed. We got it passed in the Senate. Never got it done in the House. You look at what happened this last year in terms of what was going to come out of the Senate, but then got killed. The business community plays such a strong role because, number one, You recognize the importance of having a secure border that facilitates commerce going back and forth, and the fact that those are the arteries, if you will, of North American economic integration. You also understand labor mobility. Where are the jobs? Who are the landscapers, the construction workers, all the others in the United States? You know the labor shortage. You know the same thing in Canada. And frankly, you're seeing that in Mexico as well. And so how we create, as Esteban described it, this orderly, legal, understood migration system, we have the formula. And now what we got to do is we just got to keep it going. And I think we will. I'm very confident about where we are and where we're going. And I got to say, sometimes, people say, well, the U.S. and Mexico, they got all these issues, and we do. There's some tough issues. Esteban and I had as much hair as Esteban when I started working as ambassador. It's kind of fallen out as we've dealt with some of these issues. But the reality of it is, President Lopez Obrador and President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau, we're aligned on this issue. We got to work on this issue of migration from a Western hemispheric point of view. We have done that. I'm proud of the results. I'm proud of the numbers that we now are seeing through all the different programs that we've created. And we're going to keep it going some way, somehow. We'll get it done.
Yeah. Ambassador Salazar, you mentioned there is tough issues at the table, but there is also great promise. And I think the foundation of that is the deep integration between three countries, particularly as regards to trade. And we see that the migration agenda and the trade agenda are becoming jointly into the same conversation.
Good point.
So how do we prevent from that great tough issue, which is migration, to become a block in the great progress that has been achieved because of USMCA? And in light of 2026 review, how do we prevent from the migration conversation to contaminate the USMCA review process?
That's the question.
So the first thing is that everybody has to understand 2026 and USMCA. It is not a revision, throw USMCA aside. It's a review of what's working and what's not working. I look at the labor title of USMCA. I'm tremendously proud of that. I know it's been hard for some of the business community, but the fact is workers' rights are now being much more protected than they ever were before. That's a revolutionary, historic chapter of USMCA. So there's a lot working. The fact that U.S. and Mexico are now the #1 trading partners in the history of humanity, there's a lot working. So the reviews will look at things, how are we doing, et cetera. But I fully expect USMCA is going to continue because it is a necessary requirement for the North American integration that we are aligned in as all three countries. How migration flows into that is it can be part of the solution as well. It'll take a separate track. We're very close on passing a migration bill in the United States. For whatever reasons it didn't get through this last year. It's going to be back because people are looking for a solution. So I'm optimistic about that. The last point I would make is how do you keep the irritants from essentially taking all the oxygen out of the room? And that's what, with my two wonderful friends up here, we have worked very hard at with our presidents. And that's to say, we got challenges. We have some 3 or 4 significant challenges under USMCA that we're working through. We have some significant opportunities in other areas. Let me not go there for right now. But the fact is, we just have to work through them and keep doing it. I'll talk just a second. Judicial reform. Many of you are watching and concerned. Reality of it is, if we're going to have this North American integration, you need to have certainty in the rule of law. But you also have to respect the sovereignty of the countries. And so in this particular case, Mexico has made its decision. So you're going to have a judicial reform that's going to be implemented under the Constitution here. What's our job then as U.S. companies and as my job as ambassador is let's work with Mexico, and we're going to make it work because the legal certainty that is required for this integration is something that we need to stand behind. So no matter how big the irritant might seem at the moment, our job is to try to keep turning those into opportunities. And I always say, you always have to respect the sovereignty of the countries. We're here as guests. We don't vote. None of our people who are direct hires from the U.S. have a vote in this. President Biden didn't have a vote on Mexico. Nobody does. But once their systems are in place, our job is to do everything we can to help them make it work.
Thank you. Ambassador Clark?
Is pining to interject myself in this conversation. And I guess what I wanted to say, and I can say this, I'm going in 2 months' time, but all 3 North American countries, we need to pay attention to the decisions that are taken by dispute resolution mechanisms. And we need to abide by that. All 3 countries need to abide by that, And yes, we have irritants with Mexico and we have irritants with the US. But if a decision is rendered by a panel, well, maybe all 3 countries should recommit to that process, because that seems to be one of the vulnerability of the systems. The other thing I wanted to put on the table, and I said this last night in a panel, is, and it needn't be in the context of the USMCA, but we need a conversation in North America about China, about the risks, about the opportunities, about the challenges, because this bears directly on our prosperity, our moves to greater integration of the 3 complementary, as President Sheinbaum said earlier this week, the 3 North American economies. But we need to have a serious discussion about that. And I think the NALS, or a similar process, with the input, please, of the private sector, we need to have a discussion about that.
Yeah. Ambassador Moctezuma, let's stick to the conversation of USMCA. How worried are you about the road ahead for the USMCA review process? What is Mexico doing to prepare itself, regardless of who is elected in the US November election and the implications that could have to the review? And how is Mexico strengthening on its narrative that over 35 US states have Mexico as its top 3 trading partner, and the dependence that US labor also has on the relationship of the trade between both countries?
Well, first of all, I think that all the process of the review of the USMCA is in very expert hands, because the office that is responsible for that is the Ministry of Economía. And Marcelo Ebrard was the person that started the negotiation to create the USMCA after NAFTA. So he has already a very important road behind him, and I believe that that's a very important leverage for the review. Now, I think that you have to see that not as a challenge, but as an opportunity. Because as Ken said, there are a lot of advances in the experience we had in the last 3 years regarding labor issues. We are now in the hands of a President who is very, very committed with the environment. And so all the environmental issues in the agreement, I believe that they are going to be very openly treated, and maybe deepening our commitments. She also is very, very committed with water. And that's another issue that I'm sure that we will see the review as an opportunity. And here the issue is really to create a narrative that the 3 countries must share. Graeme said that we need a a very important conversation. Globally, there is a trend to start a new approach into free trade, and some countries have started policies of protectionism. What we have to understand very well in North America is that we're playing in the world stage as a region, not as separate countries, and that we are the strongest region in the world regarding competitiveness, but also regarding human values. So that strength must be seen. And the review must not see only the trees of the three countries, but the forests of what are we looking for as a region and where do we want to get to. I always say that if you analyze different sectors, when we're together, we're so much stronger. Let's say in the manufacturing sector, in the transportation sector in manufacturing. China produces 10% of GDP, the US 8%. So if you see that picture alone, China is ahead, but if you add Mexico that produces 6% and Canada 3%, then you have 17%, which is a game changer in the total production. So I think that the most important thing is really to be convinced in the three countries that our future is together. And that we have to see that protectionism is not something that we must allow inside our countries, because we are a region and we have to see ourselves like that.
Thank you. So now this segment of the conversation, I would like to turn our vision to the future. This week, as Ambassador Salazar mentioned, it's a historic week for North America because Mexico is seeing the first woman to be the president of one of the countries of North America. So Ambassador Moctezuma, if you were right now seated in front of President Sheinbaum, what would be the three key takeaways that you would like to emphasize on why it makes sense and why it is important to bet on North America, to bet on the continued integration of our three countries based on your tenure in Washington? And what should she not forget when thinking about the US-Mexico relationship?
Well, I think it's very clear that Mexico has to stand for its international principles. Those are very clear, and we all respect them. But also, we have to be very clear in an international or external interests. And the trade with the US represents for Mexico about 44% of our GDP. So if you want to protect the 44% of our GDP, I think that is very wise to really bet for the North American way. Because that is what has given us the leverage to really compete in the world stage. So that's a very important issue. The other one is that we have learned not only to trade, we're not just selling and buying from the US. Of course, we buy 16% of every US export. 16% of the US exports is what Mexico buys. If you take the sum of Germany, France, Spain, and Italy together, it's not 16%. So that's the strength of our relationship. About 40% of all our exports are a US previous import content. So when Mexico is exporting, Also, the US is exporting. What is that showing us? That we are producing together. Our economies are not just interchanging, but they are absolutely linked. And we have learned to produce together. So what I would bet, and this is the other importance, is to have a long-term view and plan the workforce development we need, the part of the supply chain of every important sector where we must fit in, and start working with a long-term view to really fulfill those productive needs. And I think that's the issue that will link together our futures more than is linked in the present. I think that trade is one of the best ways to create allies, and that we are producing a trend in North America that is creating an alliance between three countries that we will share the future. And if the past divides us, the future will unite us.
Thank you. Ambassador Salazar, same question for you. We will have, the only thing we know for sure is that in November we'll have a new administration, whether that's on the hands of current Vice President Harris or former President Trump. What would be the key message that you would make sure that either of who is elected President of the United States understands of the importance of its relationship first with Mexico and also as part of betting on the North America integration and region?
So first of all, I agree with Esteban. The trade issue should speak for itself to anybody, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and the fact that we are where we are, that needs to continue. And hopefully we will see that no matter what the outcome of the November 5th election is. Number two, and I think this is so important for both President Claudia Sheinbaum as well as for an American president, and that is to get to know the countries and to lift up the people on both sides of the border. I so well remember my first meeting with Esteban in the White House before I even came to Mexico City. And he raised the reality that we had 364,000 Chinese studying in our best universities all over the United States of America, but only, these are his numbers, 14,000 Mexicans. We've taken that on as a high priority under the leadership of Silvio Gonzalez and others here in the Mexican government to change that. And we actually are about 30,000 today. Our goal is to get to 200,000, but it's a street that has to go both ways. My view is we need to have a lot more students from the United States coming here to Mexico to study in the great universities of this place. Enrique has been a leader in helping us figure that out through the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. We're working on it very hard with Zeppa Krieger and a number of other people who are here in this audience. We're going to make that happen. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to, Alma, is the eyes of Americans have to know the greatness of Mexico, its people, its culture, its history, and its future. And the eyes of Mexicans need to know the United States, its history, its democracy, its fight for democracy, and we got to do that. So, I mean, what I've tried to do here is making sure we have our meetings, which we have many of them at the residence. Many of you, I see many of you have been there before, is to make sure that the U.S. CEOs are also here. You know, when Esteban and I go and work on the U.S. CEO dialogue in Washington, it's an opportunity to lift up that understanding. The relationship between the United States and Mexico should transcend what is sometimes seen and portrayed in the United States as a crisis on the border and a security crisis. Fact is, we're going to resolve those issues, but we're going to do them together. We're going to do them as partners, and we're going to do them with respect to our sovereignty. And so I think lifting up the understanding Don't know that I'll ever have this opportunity to say this to President Trump. I'm sitting in front of him. That's what I would tell him.
Good.
If I am sitting in front of Kamala Harris, which I often have done, I will tell her the same thing. And so I think what we will see is this relationship is so fundamental and so strong that it'll transcend the politics of the United States. And the last point that I would make here is this is about familia. We talk about immigration reform, okay? We talk about the dreamers. We talk about nearly 12 million people in the United States who live and work in the shadows of our society. That's not the America I know. And what we should do, and hopefully we'll do it because I think there'll be enough people with goodwill to want to do it, is to change that. And so there's an understanding here that I think I'm optimistic.
Good.
I'm very optimistic that our families, I think today, the United States, 330 million people, Mexico, 130 million, United States, 70 million, 60 to 70 million Latinos, probably 40 to 50 million of them are of Mexican-American descent like myself. So where's the future of the United States of America in terms of its demographics, in terms of its democracy? President Biden likes to say this often, one out of every four school-aged children in the United States of America is Latino. Okay? That tells you where we're going to be in 10 years, 20 years. So it's a union of familia.
Great. Ambassador Clark, Canada will also likely see elections
We will certainly see elections.
very soon. So what is the case to be made on why to bet on North America? Why to bet on relationship with Mexico?
Well, I'd say, first of all, Prime Minister, if I'm speaking to Prime Minister Trudeau, I'd
Yes.
say, we've had a difficult year in some ways. We had to reimpose a partial visa on Mexico. We had the famous pause because of the comments that I made and that Ken made about the judicial reform. There hasn't necessarily been the sort of fluid contact between leaders under the previous president with the current Prime Minister. So I'd say, let's open a new chapter. Let's look to Mexico not as a series of problems that need to be addressed or irritants that need to be solved, but rather as an opportunity for Canada in North America. And we had a very difficult election in 1988. Those of you who were alive then will remember that it was an election focused on a free trade agreement with the US. And just as for Mexicans, we too have our susceptibilities on sovereignty. We too have our fears about being engulfed by the US. That's been a sort of a constant in Canadian history. We are now convinced free traders, and we are now convinced North Americans. But we have to deepen our understanding of what that means. We can't simply pay lip service to that. We can't use the trilateral mechanisms simply to address the issues that we have with Washington. And so my message to the Prime Minister is, look south from Washington. There's a remarkable opportunity there for us as Canadians. And there are business and investment and human linkages that can be fostered and sustained through your leadership, Prime Minister, as you engage with President Sheinbaum and whoever the president is in the U.S. So there's an opportunity. Seize it, because North America is our future. It's our neighborhood, but it's our future as well. So we have to think about how we articulate our posture vis-a-vis our two great North American partners.
Thank you, Ambassador Clark. So last minute of the panel. And I like
give it to Ken.
And I like to offer this minute to each of you so that you can leave us one with homework, because the relationship between Mexico, United States, and Canada should not only be dealt within our capitals. We each have a role to play. Whether you are a business executive, whether you are a student, whether you are an academic, each one can do his or her own part. So what's the call to action that U.S. ambassadors, gift to us, to this audience, so that we can ensure to act. So I'll start with Ambassador Salazar.
Keep it going. It's the American moment. These colleague ambassadors of mine and our two governments, our entire teams have worked very hard on it for the last almost 4 years. We need to continue it to go, and I'm confident that it will because of all the great people who are in this room and the 130 million Mexicanos and the 330 million people in the United States of America, our citizens and our non-citizens, and our wonderful partners to the north in Canada. Keep it going.
Ambassador Moctezuma.
Well, I would say that maybe we have different idioms, but we have a common language. And that we have to search for that language, trying to dig in our cultural codes. Mm-hmm. I think that many times there are misunderstandings because our cultural codes differ. The way we relate to each other, the way we feel, the way we express, it's different. Mm-hmm. But we're meaning the same things. So I think that it's important for the three nations to really dig into the cultural code of the other two.
Ambassador Clark.
I'm feeling very elegiac because this is probably the last time I'll be speaking at the North Capital Forum, at least as ambassador. You might have me back next year as an observer or as a speaker. I want to come back to the issue of values, which is perhaps what Moctezuma was referring to. But I'm so struck by that after more than 5 years here. Yes, there are things that separate us, that we have different histories and different political cultures, Mexicans and Canadians and Americans, but there is a community of values. And that's very precious, very important, and it's our job as North Americans in this room, I think, to foster and sustain that for the health and the future of our region and our societies.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Alma, well done.
Thank you. Just very quickly, because this year's, I would say, a feature is the Mariposa Monarca. And the Mariposa Monarca, may that be the reflection for our North America region to continue to evolve, to adapt, and to thrive. So let's have that as an inspiration during the week, and we take that for our homework after the forum ends. So thank you to the U.S.-Mexico Foundation, and thank you, ambassadors.